Welcome to TradeTheMBI.com. This is John. This report is for the 26th of January. Couldn't quite push back up to the previous highs, but closed pretty close to near them. You can see in pre-market already we're seeing a bit of a fade, and that could create a situation here with the magenta moving below the 33, which would be the first cursory point. Of course, you would need to see MBI white also taking a jump. Checkout continues to move, but it's potential that that could get a little lower. And what we're seeing is the short-term buyers, the steel here on the DOC, dipping below cyan, and that usually creates a little bit of negativity. But you still have cyan under red, so always a buy within that configuration. It's just a question of do we start to see a little bit of weakness in there? We're going to get early signals from 50K and then intraday, but still pretty consistent. And again, moving back towards that ABM gold and even the green, not inconsistent. And that would be necessary for the positive extreme fill, which takes you back to the 4809 range. But overall, still looking pretty decent. NASDAQ pulling back a little bit stronger and much closer. So where the NASDAQ's been leading it, it will also lead the down move. But again, relatively speaking, when you're talking about a down move, you're talking about at least filling your positive extreme, which isn't really a negative as much as just satisfying the pressures that have been created by the algos. From a treasury standpoint, no movement really whatsoever, and because again, you're still getting the mixed signals between unemployment, industrial orders, those kinds of things back and forth. The real issue here becomes oil, and it's the driving force of all things. Um, it's going to be both the driver of inflation, but also a slower of the economy, and definitely not in a direction that supports added growth, and certainly uh, not something that supports rate cuts either, which begets a vicious cycle because obviously, with rates what they are now, it's driving massive deficits, which is creating more artificial borrowing, which only accelerates, and you get into this steamroller. And this is always the inflationary issue of Federal Reserve banking, and that idea of just keep adding to it, and it's just dollar debasement is all it is. But that's of course everyone says dollar debasement, but the reality is when you're trading most things in dollars, it affects the other currencies as well. This is why euro where it is kind of ridiculous, and the more oil rises, euro has to go down, and there's no alternative to it. Just not a justifiable situation when you're not buying anything commodity wise in euros, and it's a drain. From a gold standpoint, not a whole lot of movement, but getting closer to stabilization here with magenta over yellow, and still have MBI white leading significantly. So it's once that flips around, then you'll start to see a secondary move. And I think if oil gets back over 80, I think the pressure for gold upward is undeniable. And the same thing happens with cryptos. Obviously, this was more of a news related event, but it had positive extremes that needed to be filled. And there you go. So you filled the primary move that was this breakout. Very typical when you break into the new high ranges, you then come back, retest that support. This particular stage, you got magenta rising, and you could see that crossover, which would be new buy configuration there. ETH, likewise, we talked about it with the MBI white leading, that it was not likely to, hold that 38 down. It didn't mean that it was necessarily going to drop there. We've had nice bounce from the DOC steel, which has been enough to kind of hold it in place even throughout its weakness. Still strong extreme histogram under the red line, which promotes that back and forth weakness, and any continued softness, particularly from the market. And yeah, you can drive easily down to that all the way right back to here, which is not quite a positive extreme from a ETH standpoint. It was yellow, it was pretty close, but that's where I would be looking to in additional weakness, which pretty well corresponds to just below the 23%. I think it's likely that that's able to hold on if Bitcoin and them find some support, relatively speaking, in there. And you can see from the 50K standpoint, we ended up with pretty much a back and forth day. The pop faded back, people bought it again. That's not being sustained, and that becomes problematic from a broader view. So people will see that as like a triple top version, or even, you get into other head and shoulders, all these patterns. It's not relevant to much comparative to what we see from the readings, and the readings week at this particular stage with MBI White leading. So, and you can see this building. So we had the super high histogram. We made higher highs on slightly lower histogram. That faded back and reset. Tried to make another run much lower. Check out histogram here. And once we got the last peak, not able to hold that and breaks down. So now you will need to see this move into uh, negative 60 range for it to be continued weakness, or this MBI White leading, now at the 50%, you would expect a move. If you head towards the 23%, we're definitely going to the zero. It's just the way it works. We saw the mid morning breakout move up there, and then it just propelled, but then filled it all the way back. And it's the beauty of those little gap area moves. And once that happened, we ended the day, nice positive rush, got us right back to the peak, just a fraction below. And then here in post market, that's when everything started to sell. And you can see the MBI White leads that took place throughout every attempt at doing anything here in the post market. And that has led to where it currently are. Uh, Modest, but definitely definable. So, all in all, it's easily readable, and that's all that matters to us. So, we just take it back and forth as it gives, go from there. As always, though, if anything relevant pops up, I'll put it on the Skype chat. Trade well. Have a good one.